We're getting started. So again, our our purpose here is really threefold. First is to share information with our members and our allies and our friends about how native CD5s are being impacted by COVID, and also resources that might be available for our folks to help out their clients and their constituents and their people. We'd like to learn from our peers, and we think this is a great opportunity for us to engage in peer learning. And also, finally, this is a space for our members and our people to connect. To remind everybody that native CD5s, while we're few, we're not on islands. There are a lot of us. We're working together, and we're working across 27 different states across the United States. So thank you for what you do. Here's an agenda for today, and it's pretty self-explanatory. And we do have our one guest and our one featured member. And at the end, we'll get into unveiling our regions, NCN's regions, and why they make sense. But first, I think it's important to start with an acknowledgement that we are in challenging times. The country is in challenging times right now. And the challenges faced by a lot of communities, such as African American communities and Native American communities, are real, they're serious. And we're here to, as Native CD5s, to help our people. And also, I think we need to acknowledge this movement that is going on right now. And this, I think we've shared some of the statistics, but the Federal Reserve Bank's Center for Indian Country Development came out with a study two months ago that also highlights the really disproportionate impact of Native communities and fatalities that Native people experience. I want to say it showed that Native American men are 14 times more likely to have a fatal encounter with the police than white groups, and Native American women, unfortunately, are 38 times more likely to have a fatal encounter. And so I think it's important for Native groups and us to acknowledge that, and acknowledge that the Floyd situation is very serious and very relevant. So I just want to start with that. Moving forward with our agenda, we have a bunch of things on our legislative and administrative update piece, and I wish we had more time to spend on them, but I think we should spend more time with our guests and our featured member. But a couple days ago, the Senate passed the PPP update. We want to make sure everybody's aware of this. It extends the period where you would be able to make expenditures that could be reimbursed. And it also allows for a greater percentage of non-payroll expenses to be made into grants, basically. So previously it was 75%, now it's 60%. And if the loans are not forgiven, that period is extended up to 5 years instead of 2. And it allows more time to rehire workers if the group hasn't done that. One other thing we wanted to highlight was that the House Financial Services put out a statement saying that they're going to move forward with hearings the first week of July. This is definitely relevant to us and our membership because we care about the NACA, Native American CD5 Assistance funding, and that would run through the financial services, and that would be something that they want to move on the first week of July. So this is an important time, so we wanted to make sure we flag that. Pause really quickly if anybody, and I think if anybody has questions about the PPP update, our guest Dante is an expert, and I think maybe we'll just hold the questions on the PPP until we get to Dante. Really quickly, the House Financial Services had a hearing a couple days ago. They talked about quite a few different things, but it was titled CDFIs and Minority Depository Institutions. I think were the subjects. We have a link down at the bottom if you want to go look at the hearing and also look at some of the legislation they looked at. Quite a bit of this is directly relevant to our folks. At the same time, I think a lot of these pieces of legislation will face real challenges in the Senate and take a lot of work to pass the Senate. But we'll put the slides up online and folks can take a look at these as well. Good question from Dave Castillo about CRA. I think I'll have Dante. Dante's going to speak a bit about the CRA with us. So this is something that's brand new, fresh off the press. So today we're sharing, this is the first place we're sharing it, and we're going to share it online with our members as well. But we had a group of our champions in the House put together a bipartisan letter in support of native CDFIs and echoing our concerns about making sure that CDFIs are eligible to receive the PPP. If you recall, we've been talking about this issue for weeks, and I think last week we said it's like Groundhog Day, where wake up and nothing's really changed. Hopefully this helps lead to some change, but here's a copy of the letter and we'll share it. That was signed by all these members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans. A lot of the Arizona delegation put this letter out and sent it to both the FDA and the Treasury, saying that native CDFIs, I guess we'll go back to some of the language. You can't see all of it, but we'll put it on there, that native CDFIs should be and were meant to be eligible for the PPP. And so that, I think that's great news. So, and I want to thank, I guess, the Arizona delegation who kind of led the way. Greg Stanton was this guy up here. He was the, I guess, he helped get the letter done, and also the Native Partnership for Housing, Rollin Wood. I don't know if Rollin's on the call, but Rollin pushed some of his members, and actually Dave Castillo also leaned out and reached out to his members as well. So thanks to our folks for getting that done, and we'll put that out there. Excited about that. And now I think we can get to the more fun stuff. It's my pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine, Dante Desiderio. I've known Dante for, I would say 13 years probably. And he's a member of the Saponi tribe. These bullet points don't really do any justice, but he's, I guess, well respected in on anything and everything related to Native economic development policy. And he's someone that Congress goes and looks at and relies upon when asking anything in Native economic policy related. He's headed up the NFOA for the past 10 years, and previously he used to work with the National Congress of American Indians as their head of economic development. And beyond that, he's really mysterious and doesn't have much of a bio online, so I couldn't copy and paste that. But Dante is a good guy, and he's this photo is from our last meeting in November for NCN, but he's come to several NCN meetings and has been advocate for native CDFIs. So we've asked him a few questions, and Dante, here's a bit more about NFOA. Can you tell us a bit about NFOA and what you all have been doing in response to COVID?
Sure, Jackson, and thanks for the invitation to come and talk with your community, and also Chairman Upton for your involvement with our organization and some of the common issues that we've worked on. Yes, I've known Jackson for quite a while, and we worked together at some point in our careers, so it's great to work with him again. And our organization has always been very supportive of the native CDFIs and their role that they play in Indian country, and it's really exciting to see some of the changes and the creativity in some of the CDFIs as they were growing, at least before the pandemic hit and all the other economic challenges. So we're hoping to be as helpful as we can to make sure that we are including native CDFIs in all of the different economic relief efforts. So I want to go over a couple of those today. But I do want to talk about the relief efforts. At least you raised the PPP. So today, this morning, we saw the jobs numbers came in a whole lot better than we anticipated. And that's a result, some are claiming, on some of the financial shows directly from the PPP lending and loan forgiveness program. So if those numbers look good, you saw the president come out right after those numbers came in, it looks like that may be on the table for the next economic relief package. So just based on the information that we're hearing this morning, I would be cognizant of what that means for an election year and the possibility that more funds would go into that. So Jackson, I think we'll continue to work together to make sure the CDFIs are in a better position to have that lending authority and to meet the challenges of their constituents. Moving on to the other parts of the relief effort, we have been pretty active on trying to hold morning briefs to fill in the tribal community and all the other constituents on what's going on here in DC. So we used to do those every day, but since things have slowed down a little bit, we're doing them as things come up. So I think as we move on, those will be fewer and far between since things are sort of playing out. The last things we're waiting for are the BIE money, which has not gone out yet. We heard this morning that that's going to be going out in the next 5 to 7 days. And then we also have the food nutrition program monies. We're still working on that. And then finally, Treasury, which is has a whole lot of challenges to try to get this money out in the next week. We're predicting mid-June for getting those funds out. So that last part, the coronavirus relief fund, is probably important for this community as well. Treasury came up with an FAQ that allowed governments to give sub-grants or grants to businesses in the form of help. And we did see this morning that Yurok tribe announced that they were going to be doing some business relief. I know that Chickasaw and some other tribes are looking into doing the same thing. So it really would be important to make sure your communities are coordinating with your respective tribes to be able to come up with a program if they're interested in providing that relief, to make sure that some of your loans will be taken care of, or your businesses will be taken care of through some of this relief. So right now, the way we're reading Treasury's FAQs and guidance is that that is an allowable expense, and tribes are moving forward with that. And I think we're in a safe area as long as it's something that is justified by the tribal government, and it encourages anything to do with the health and economic impacts that are directly related to the coronavirus relief fund. We see tribes moving forward in that area to try to get their economies going. So I think that's an important component for the CDFI network to be able to engage with their tribes.
Dante, could you unpack that just a little bit? Maybe more pointedly, where do you think native CDFIs can help with their tribal governments with respect to the coronavirus relief fund?
Well, I think on the right now, from what we're hearing from a lot of tribes, there's a lot of they're either gauging their membership on what is going to be an appropriate use of the funds they've received. So we have the population money that's already gone out. For tribes that haven't been hit as hard, they're looking more on what are the economic impacts and how do we get things going again. And then we have the other 40% that's scheduled to go out in a couple of weeks. So you have tribes trying to figure out what's going to be the best use for their community, not just now, but there might be, trying to figure out what's going to be the unforeseen risks. So for the tribes that have and want to support some of their either tribally owned businesses that have not seen relief, we've been left out of the Main Street Fund pretty much. We've been left out of the PPP until the last minute. So all of those things, it is a component of this to allow tribal governments and state governments to be able to set up their own grant programs, and the grant programs for businesses, I should say. And as long as there is some sort of government action, the governing documents are really going to matter in this. So it might be good to engage the tribe early as the CDFI that's either servicing the tribe or in that service area, to make sure that some of your clients will be considered when the tribe is forming these governing documents, or so that relief is an allowable relief for the tribal governments to be able to set up their own grant program. So it's really a good use of the CDFI's time to really go in and try to engage tribes early, and they may not have made up their mind on the full relief of, or what may be included in that. So it's a time that engagement is going to be well worth it to be able to protect that economy and keep those tribal businesses and other businesses growing, or at least getting some relief. There hasn't been a lot available.
Thanks. And one thing we asked Dante to talk a bit about was something that he took the lead on, and that was the Community Reinvestment Act updates. And obviously, we've talked a bit about it, but I think it'd be good to hear from Dante about where he thinks some opportunities would lie for native CDFIs and the CRA update.
Yeah, and I know I bugged both Jackson and Pete Upton to be able to come out to New Mexico with us, and we talk about this trip all the time, but it makes such a huge difference when the agencies come out to Indian country and see things for themselves. We're hearing and have continued to hear that trip has been so influential on the controller of the currency to be able to come up with Community Reinvestment Act regulations that were not just going to include Indian tribes, but really put us over the top and try to shift capital into Indian country. So that trip, happened last August, and the outreach and engagement has continued with the Office of the Controller of Currency over that time period, up until, trying to protect our gains up until the final regulations were just released a couple of weeks ago. So I just want to make this statement, which is worth making. The Indian country did better than any other constituency in the Community Reinvestment Act. There are a lot of people who are unhappy with the change, and there are the FDIC and the Federal Reserve did not go along with it. But these are the regulations, and most or 70% of the entire banking industry needs to comply with these new regulations. These are the federally chartered, usually bigger institutions that are going to have to comply. And that means a lot, not just to the CDFIs, but native-owned banks and others, and for tribal projects. So I want to unpack a little bit of that and go into some of the specific things that we did manage to get for Indian country. In looking at one of the arguments we were making is, for tribal governments, is that if the federal government comes up with a program, so there's a housing program, there's USDA programs, there's a guaranteed loan fund and Interior, the Indian Energy Guarantee Fund. So all of those things are federal initiatives to try to address some of the Indian country concerns. Those should be really easy things for banks to be able to follow those programs. There's already a determination that that's going to help an underserved community. So when you're looking at how to leverage these programs as a tribe or as another entity, you want to be able to look at these larger infrastructure projects, housing projects, and other things, and it's an easy thing to point to for not just getting the federal assistance, but for the banking community and saying, look, you're going to get extra CRA credits for this. So new market tax credits, for example, it shifts a little bit because we are now eligible for new market tax credits, the opportunity zones, all of those things that are federal programs. You just need to think about that for maybe helping to leverage a bank to be able to invest in Indian country. The other part of that I think is really interesting is, there's a formula that they put together for low and moderate income communities. It looks at the status of those communities and the amount of loans that are given and all of that stuff. Well, we're not really in that bucket. We are called a top line ad for all of this. So we get included no matter what. And what that means is any investment in Indian country counts for a bank. Any investment in a CDFI that's serving a tribe or tribal community counts. So it changes the dynamic a little bit with what counts, but it also changes because of the idea of where it counts. So if you're Citibank in New York City and you don't really deal with Indian country at all, that doesn't matter. You have to comply. Indian country is within your assessment area. So it changes the relationships a little bit. Now, if you think about this, and if you're a bank like Citibank and you're not used to dealing with Indian country, how do you shift and go into the complicated world that's Indian country and make those investments? And I think one of the things that's attractive on why Citibank would come into Indian country is because of that comment before. Larger infrastructure projects count, investments in businesses count, just about anything in Indian country counts, but still you have to navigate that. So if Citibank wanted to do this, they can go and invest in a native owned bank and do those joint projects together and get credit for the CRA. They can also go in with the CDFI and tag along with those CDFI investments and get credit for that. And again, no matter where they are, it's going to count for their CRA credits. And we also wanted something in here to give them an added incentive to deal with Indian country. So one of the most important provisions in here is that there's a multiplier that goes along with Indian country. So those areas like the Appalachia or the Mississippi Delta, they have a multiplier. And I think those are the only other two things in the regulations. But Indian country also has that same multiplier. So if you're making a CRA investment in a disadvantaged community and it's not an Indian country project, you might get X amount of credits. If you go to Indian country, you get twice as many credits for investing in Indian country. So we wanted some sort of incentive to have the capital flow to Indian country. So larger infrastructure projects count, investments in native-owned businesses counts. So everything pretty much counts in Indian country, and it counts no matter where you are. And some banks don't even have a footprint for branches. So for example, virtual banks, which will continue to be popping up, they don't have a footprint, but if they wanted to meet their CRA obligations, they can invest in Indian country. So this might be important on how you all reach out to those federally chartered institutions and start engaging on what it is that the needs of the CDFIs are. And the one final thing I want to talk about that I think is really important is the idea that equity investments count. So that has never been the case before. So if Wells Fargo wanted to go into a CDFI, one of your clients, and say, we want to have an equity participation in this business, as long as that is on the books for the bank, it counts for a CDFI investment, and that encourages longer term investments in these businesses. It's not like they invest one time, they take their money out and say, you guys are on your own, as long as that investment is in there. So we wanted to encourage that longer term patient capital to coming into Indian country. So you can see by just running down the list of things that were included, the controller of the currency, Joseph Otting, who just retired, really wanted to make sure Indian country was going to be having capital shift towards meeting their needs. And I think when you look throughout this and just do a basic search for the word Indian in the CRA regulations, we're all over this. And we're all over it because he also wanted to give examples of what would count so banks would be really clear on this. So the next question is that these regulations are out. What does that mean? You know, Joseph Otting, you know, who really wanted to put his emphasis on Indian country, is now retired or resigned. What does that mean for the next controller? Is this going to stay? Is there going to be the same emphasis? And we're happy to report that he has already reached out to our organization, and they want to be able to have another adventure into Indian country to make sure that the banks and the needs for Indian country start lining up and the banks are educated on what's in the CRA. So that's really good news for the continuity for the next controller of the currency. And we'll see what happens. It's an election year and everything, but it's right now these things are final. We're getting a lot of support, and the new controller is jumping in to support Indian country as well. So Pete, that might mean another call for a road trip. So you have to be ready for that.
Yeah, I'm open to that. That was, you know, that was very impactful even for me. And, you know, the impact that trip had was astounding. It really was amazing. So count me in.
Right. So I think that's the summary of, you know, some of the things that we wanted to get across for this community, and the idea that this now shifts, I think, for educating the financial community a little bit more. And we will continue to partner with the Native CDFI network to be able to bring you all in to make the case for CDFIs, and to try to get the banks to make it easy for the banks to say yes to Indian country. Jackson, I know I'm taking a lot of time. I want to keep things open for questions and make sure Amber has plenty of time to chat. So it's up to you for.
Perfect. I'm sorry, I was talking and it got muted. Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat box we want to handle, and then we want to transition to Amber. Jonelle, do you want to ask your question, or I can read it?
Hi, Dante. This is Desiderio from the Youth Fund. We just separated from our sponsor entity, the Nez Perce Tribe. And so they brought us in a couple weeks ago in regards to the CARES funding spend down. One is for the small business funding, and the other one is, you know, potentially for the general welfare. But in regards to business, so, you know, the vetting process and the definition of business, because it's an opportunity for the tribe to further define small business for the community. Do they need to have a code? Because, you know, when I look at the thing, it's just from the webinars, just like make sure that it's audit proof, right? So I just want to make sure that we're following suit. Right now, we're preparing a survey for the community with small business questions, but we have people that, you know, that set up at powwows and sell food, or they walk around the tribal office, and, you know, just different ways in how they supplement their income, including artists and crafters. So we have that range, and then all the way up to a bigger business. What is a way that we can help as a CDFI? Would we use, you know, I guess other examples of other CDFIs that are doing the same thing to yourself, and then also to the Native CDFI network team. So that way we have a pathway moving forward, and we can best help the tribe and also the community, the small business community. Thanks.
Yeah, this is a question we get often, is what constitutes a small business, and how do we set up the documents around this. So it is really important that the tribe defines what a small business is. And I'll just, the reason I'm saying that is because the vendors who might set up at powwows, or go around the office and, sell different things. It's really, they may be a sole proprietor, or they may be have other status or not. It's a kind of an impromptu thing where they make extra money. If you all define that and you're giving that out and looking at some sort of proof that there's some sort of loss of income, or you had X amount of income last year. I don't know if you have to go into that much detail, but you should define it and make sure that those different uses of the funds or different who you distribute that to is clearly defined in the governing document. I think that's a good way to go. Just don't forget about the sole proprietors who are, I think you probably have more of those, so it doesn't look like you're giving out an individual contribution. How do you separate that? Because that's if you're looking for audit proof, when you're giving anyone as an individual funds, that likely will be a flag. The general welfare, which gives benefits to individuals, that won't be counted as income for them. So going through the general welfare program itself is a really smart thing to do for tribes, where if the tribe is giving out money to or benefits outside of that or other programs, you want to make sure there's some sort of nod to the general welfare of the tribal community and what counts as general welfare. I think in that sense, it's not necessary, and it's not necessary that it's written down, but the way Treasury has been acting with even getting the money out, I would, as a tribal government, look for that added protection of saying this is going through our general welfare program. We're going to have X amount of housing benefits that go along with this, or anything like that you can run through the general welfare program, and then defining what constitutes a business and what tribes need to do. If you noticed on the UROC press release, they actually have an application that people need to fill out, which is great, and maybe saying why you need that money. Oh, and the last question, Janelle, we don't have a lot of time here, and the second round isn't even out and we're already, in June. So there's not a lot of time to really compare what the best cases are or best practices are for these things. So I think a lot of tribes are going to be on their own to try to figure it out, and then get the money out by the end of the year. We are working on the next round to get that deadline extended, but right now we only have 6-7 months to do all this.
Does anyone else have another question for Dante they want to ask?
Hey, Jackson, this is Dave.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Dante, I got a call from the OCC for a bank examination, one of the kind of community input piece, and they let me know that the OCC has 2 virtual sessions that they'd like to conduct within the country, probably in July. So I'm not sure which one's going to come first, or if they're going to just do the one. Have you heard anything on that? And then secondly, it was a real great conversation. We were basically talking about a lender that, obviously they're going through the examination for CRA, and they're in a tribal area. And, the person from the OCC has been around for 20, 30 years. And we were reflecting back on after Nahasda passed and all that stuff. And I guess one of the things that we kind of came out of it with was just that not a whole lot has changed. Banks don't have a ton of appetite for tribal deals. All the big banks disbanded their native lending teams, both commercial and residential lending. Even the GSEs have disbanded their native lending teams, and they haven't put anyone back in, even with duty to serve. So, it's just that question. It's like you can't find one native or one person that's worked in any country to kind of lead this stuff. Does CRA and the changes to it suggest that might be happening, and what could NFO and NCN do to help stimulate that?
Yeah, I think the virtual sessions, I think they're wrestling with whether they want to try to do one in person or do the virtual sessions. I think it's really good. What they're trying to do, from my understanding, is include the banks in that to let them know that this is, the new regulations, and they're serious about the Indian country stuff. So they're taking a more active role than they normally do in outreach to banks. But on the, you're right, it doesn't compel banks to deal with Indian country, but at least we've never really effectively been in these regulations before. The banks, if we sort of were included, but when it came closer to an examination, the banks always defaulted to what they knew would definitely count instead of what was on the edges. So we were always really on the edge. So we're no longer on the edge, we're at that top line area. So I think this is now part of our responsibility with Native CDFI Network and the FOA and others to start that education of the banks, because you're right, there's not, so just because you have a native practice in a bank doesn't mean the CRA department or the new market tax credit department actually talk to each other. And for these regulations, it is for the larger banks. So we need to do a better job of talking to the CRA people, which is why we want to have the OCC involved. So when you have the controller of the currency having a meeting or having a virtual webinar and inviting the banks to a session, that means a lot. So that's what we're working on now. So I have some optimism on this, but it's not, but you're right. It's still going to be a lot of work, but at least we're included, and we're included in a very definite way with specific examples.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dante. I really appreciate your time. Pete, do you have any last words with Dante, and then transition?
I just appreciate, the partnership and, working with NCN and the FOA. I think everybody can see the value that the collaboration brings. Keeping the native CDFI at the table is huge. And I thank Dante and his team for always including us. So thank you, Dante.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Jackson.
Thank you, Dante. All right, great. Great. And now we'd like to move on to our featured member. So our featured member is Amber Schulz-Oliver. And I think a lot of folks know Amber already. If you've been on our calls, she's been on a lot of our calls. She's the executive director for the ATNI's Economic Development Corporation. She's Yakima and Wasco, and she's got an extensive background, has got an MBA. And I think Indian country is really fortunate to have her working in the CDFI space. So thank you for joining us, Amber. And can you tell us a bit about ATNI EDC, what you all are doing, and give us an update from everything in Portland? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jackson. And thank you for inviting me here to speak today. It's really an honor to be included in a group of such strong speakers. So I am going to begin with a brief overview of ATNI EDC. I think that most folks are familiar with us, or at least familiar with our parent organization, ATNI. We were born out of our parent organization in 1996 to provide financial and technical assistance to ATNI member tribe, and that mission also extends to serve ATNI tribal members. We began lending in 2000 and formed our subsidiary CDFI, ATNI Financial Services, in 2003. We serve 56 tribes in the Pacific Northwest, and their tribal members were tribal citizens. Our organization is unique because we have such a broad region, and also because we engage in broader economic development planning activities in addition to making loans and providing technical assistance. And Jackson, I'll just ask you to advance the slides. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what our response to COVID-19 has been. We've really been focusing on supporting small businesses and trying to make sure that they're able to survive these turbulent times. And I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the ATNI EDC Forgivable Loan Fund, because I think we created a really interesting model that can be replicated. Currently, the funds that capitalize the program were intended for Oregon small businesses, but we'd like to try and grow that program to serve more of the ATNI region. Early on, philanthropic organizations partnered with the state of Oregon to form the Oregon Small Business Stabilization Fund, and I believe it got around $700,000 at its top. The advisory committee of that fund viewed CDFIs as the best vehicle to deploy those funds because we know our businesses and how to best offer support to them. The thing that I was really struck by is that they made it really easy for us. They basically called me up and said that they're going to send us these funds and that we can use them however we saw fit to benefit our community. They understood that we have to maintain our own organizational health in order to continue doing the good work that we do. So we reserved a portion of those funds for operations and used the rest to capitalize the ATNI EDC COVID-19 Emergency Response Forgivable Loan Fund. I'm never brief when I name things, so I like to try and come up with some more concise names, but it's very descriptive. So the application opened on April 20th and closed June 1st, and in that time we received 60 applications. Now, can you go to the next slide, please? By the end of this process, we had approved, can you go back one? Jackson? Yeah, okay. So by the end of this process, we had approved 54 small businesses to receive a total of $120,000 in about 6 weeks. One of the most beautiful parts about this process was the opportunity to strengthen partnerships with other community organizations. Early on, we engaged other technical assistance providers like ONAVIN, the Oregon Native American Chamber, and Native American Youth and Family Center because they understand the business landscape in Oregon. We invited members of ONAC and NAYA to serve on our review committee, which met weekly to review applications and make early approvals to discuss the ongoing strategies to fairly and effectively deploy these funds. We also formed new relationships with Native-owned businesses in Oregon because, as it turns out, giving away money is a great marketing tool. So that was a wild ride, and in truth, it was a little bit bigger push than we had imagined, but we created a solid process, and I think that everyone is happy with the way that it turned out. And so you're on the slide that I want to be on now to talk about what some of these other products are that we've been working on. So we've been working on developing other loan products also to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. Our board recently approved an emergency loan product that will be available to tribal enterprises and Native-owned businesses throughout the region. These funds will be available to businesses that were directly impacted by COVID. Loan amounts will vary between $5,000 and $25,000, with no payments due for the first 6 months. Interest rate will start at 2.5% and then increase over the next couple of years to encourage repayments. We're also working with Business Oregon to distribute grant funds to businesses in accordance with their outlined criteria. Business Oregon is the economic development arm of the state. Business Oregon is asking CDFIs and economic development districts in the state, of which we are both, to get these grants out to businesses we serve. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I want to switch gears and finish up with talking a little bit about the Northwest Native Lending Network. This network was officially formed a little more than a year ago through an ATNI resolution and currently resides under ATNI EDC. Our mission is to increase the visibility of Native lending in the Pacific Northwest, support lending institutions that serve Indian country, and share technical assistance resources, create tools and systems to facilitate lending in Indian country, demonstrate the value of CDFIs, and strengthen key relationships. And as you can see from the list, membership is open to loan providers in Indian country, not just Native CDFIs. So we have a tribal credit enterprise and non-Native CDFIs that have also opted into the network. The value of this network has truly proven itself during this pandemic. Early on, we met to discuss advocacy efforts and stay informed of key issues as everything was moving so quickly. Ted Piccolo from Northwest Native Development Fund was at the forefront, making sure that the network was kept apprised of any new information in real time. It's also been a really great way for us to stay connected with each other and learn how each of us are responding to the pandemic. The network has served as a touchstone, whether through group Zoom calls or reaching out to each other one-on-one to get some support. I also just want to give a quick shout out to Crystal. I don't think she's on the phone, but our loan officer has really been working, she's been working her butt off, spending hours on the phone with nervous business owners and processing these loans. I really think that some of her most valuable work has just been providing a sounding board for businesses that are trying to navigate this confusing landscape. So I just want to give her a shout out. It's just the two of us, and she's really taken a lot of this work. So that was a pretty quick presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Jackson. And I also want to thank everybody on this call for all of your hard work through these weird times.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great update from the Pacific Northwest. I think you guys are doing great things, and we're impressed by the NNLN. We think that it's obviously providing value to your members, and the Northwest NNLN members have been very active on our calls. We see Dave Tovey and Shalyn and Janelle and Johanna. So thanks. I'll pause right here right now. Does anyone have any questions for Amber?
Hey, Amber, I have a question for you. Kind of ties into our next segment, but by having a consolidated team effort and a strong membership base there, do you find that locally advocating locally with tribal, state, and regional, is that kind of bolster, I guess, your voice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we have the executive director from our parent organization, ATNI, and they're really the policy advocacy arm of the whole group. But it's been a huge, it's just been a kind of a really neat system that all fits in with each other. We use the platform of ATNI to help highlight legislation that needs to be highlighted.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Hi. Hey, Amber, this is Jackie. I just wanted to, Tlingit and Haida Central Council, we're a member of ATNI as part of the Pacific Northwest. Does that mean that we could also be, we have a lot of tribal citizens in your area. Could we also be part of your Native network, our CDFI?
Yeah, absolutely, Jackie. It's an opt-in network. So absolutely, we would love to have your guys' participation in that.
Thank you. I also, Jackson, have to give out a shout out to, I didn't do it earlier, but I just think that those, NAFOA has done an amazing job keeping all of us well informed on what's happening with Treasury and COVID relief funds. And I couldn't let this call go out without saying that Dante's done an incredible job in keeping us well informed. So shout out and congrats to him.
Thank you, Jackie. It means a lot coming from you.
So Amber, you guys in your offices? Looks like you guys are back in the office there.
Well, we only have 2 staff members, so I sent Crystal home mid-March, and so I've been using the office.
Okay. Just wondering how things are different on out West Coast. Cool.
Hey, Jackson and Amber, I think one thing that's that I know Amber touched on, but I think it's really important. When we start putting out application for money, we identified a number of Indian-owned small businesses across Oregon that we didn't know really existed, and we can start. It's kind of as much as a marketing value, being able to identify those folks, and now we can start connecting with them for further resources. So I think that was a big thing, and with what UROC did and others, I think that's a real opportunity to, for organizations like ours that provide small business support services to be able to capture those, make sure we're serving their needs.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I meant to underline that, but I think that's exactly a really good example of looking locally, not just tribally. So yeah, for a while we focused on the tribal CRF funds, but at the same time, the states have gotten a whole lot more money than the tribes have, and we should hold them accountable as well. And luckily, ATNI EDC has a good relationship with the state of Oregon, and they're going to be able to use some of their CARES Act funding directly to help businesses. And I think that's one of the good things about organizing regionally is we can focus on these regions and hopefully coordinate there. So good job, ATNI EDC there.
Thank you.
All right. We have time for one more question if there's.
Hey Jackson, I don't have so much a question, just a suggestion. You know, if these OCC CRA sessions are going to happen, and I think they will, I just wonder if, you know, NFOA and NCN membership could kind of come together and pull together a white paper, like, you know, pretty quickly. I've been disturbed by some of the webinars that I've been on with investors and, you know, folks putting out a bunch of numbers that don't seem justifiable. And I think for us to have a constructive session with OCC and the lenders around CRA, we need to be able to point to, you know, real numbers, actual volumes of activity that NCN members have been involved in, and where the actual opportunities are at.
I think, yeah, that's a good idea. And it sounds like, I think Dante and NFO might be working on something already, but I think maybe I'll follow up with Dante and then we'll see what we can do. But I think that's a great suggestion.
But David, feel free, or anyone, to send a note, Dante at NFOA.org, on what some of the issues are. I think there's a lot of work on all of this, but the more specific we get, we may not have to wait until a forum to try to address these things. So just let us know. Let's start coordinating on this stuff.
Jackson, this is Joanna Donahoe. I just wanted to, since you have a couple minutes left here, I just wanted to quickly jump in and ask whether you and Dante, and hi Dante, good to see you, whether you and Dante have explored whether or not some of the CARES Act funds, either to the tribes or to the TDHEs, if there's a way to use any of those funds as capital, if you can tie them to a COVID-related expense for native CDFIs to lend. Specifically, for example, like if there's a new demand for home ownership because of COVID-19, can some of that capital be used as lending capital?
So I'm sure Jackson's glad I'm jumping in here. I don't really, without more details and how it's defined and everything, really want to make a call on that. I think it's one of the frustrating things for us. On one hand, the Treasury rules are still somewhat vague, and on the other hand, we think that's good. If you're giving out mortgages, most people have leaned towards helping people with their mortgage payments because of the COVID-related issues. Giving out mortgages is a different story, or making those capital expenditures, anything that has to do with that, whether it's in the form of you're basically financing that, is going to be really difficult unless I know all the circumstances, or there may be an attorney that can help. I know it's not the answer you want, but it gets really tricky when you're falling outside of that specific help.
Yeah, I mean, I just wondered if anyone's starting to look at it at all, because it's just a lot of dollars, and you know, I don't know if you realize this, Dante, but I work with the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition, and the CDFIs there have a lot. They're saying that, yeah, some of their clients need mortgage relief, but the bigger issue now is the demand for homeownership has increased.
Yes, and on that, you know, it's been widely reported. Everybody's known this in Indian country for a long time, but we have multi-generational and highest occupancy housing, and that tends to lead towards, you know, just like Italy, it leads towards a higher infection rate and things like that. So this is a natural outcome. I think the creativity may help here, but I don't want to say one way or another. But yeah, you're right. That's a direct outcome of the coronavirus. Treasury's been really hesitant to even answer those types of questions on capital, and they do wrestle with the idea that if you're funding a temporary facility, does that really help in taxpayer funding? So these other things that you're taking care of to mitigate future emergencies are they going to be justified or not? So you guys are going to have to, unfortunately, make that call. I think the governing documents and the justification are really going to be important for anything that you do.
Well, this is Jackie. I know a number of tribes and housing authorities are actually doing mortgage loans with their COVID money for homeownership to develop new or bring in additional housing stock to their tribal citizens. I know we're doing it, others are doing it. Like the reducing overcrowding was an eligible item under even the ICDBG IT, imminent threat grants, and certainly under the, the CARES Act overall funding. In fact, even some tribes are doing some significant reducing overcrowding efforts and can do them with with a mortgage loan attached.
Yeah, and I think Jackie she's tying it to something else that specifically the federal government has done to mitigate the impacts of the crisis. That's really it's a good thing to do. So the other thing, Joanna, I'm wondering why you're sitting in the middle of a road. I'm waiting for a truck to go by. I don't.
That's my journey to the Badlands.
Okay.
Thank you guys. I mean, I would just say, Dante, to the extent that, maybe Jackson, this is kind of a best practices to look at that, but we'll definitely have to continue the discussion, because you're right, Dante, you have to get creative about it and look at a lot of different legal implications. But it's good to know that others are exploring this as well. Thanks.
And that's what we're here to do, is hear from our peers. And so thanks for sharing that, Jackie. And so we're at the end of our hour. We have a couple more slides we wanted to go through. Pete, do you want to go through them now, or you want to handle them next week?
Yeah, why don't you just touch on them briefly, just so that we can give a heads up for next week's discussion?
Yeah. So really what we wanted to talk about is something we brought up back in April, that our board was looking at helping our members mobilize at a better level. Okay, I think Dante had to drop off. Sorry, Dante. But we are looking at mobilizing at a local and regional level. And so here were some examples of maps we had put together earlier. These were the BIA map on the left side and the Federal Reserve map on the right. Obviously, those don't work perfectly for our membership. And so what we did was we put together a map that we think, as best as we can, aligns and evens out the number of native CDFIs out there. And here it is. We'll have them in the slides at the end of the day. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time, so we'll just kind of go through really quickly there. The amount of CDFIs in each region go from 3 to 8, but nothing more, nothing less. And we want to make sure that, I guess before we get going, we want to clearly state our purpose, why we're looking at something like this. One, we want to make sure that there's a more inclusive national voice and we don't leave any region out of actions we're taking. And one way to do that is divide things in regions, strengthen local advocacy. As we've seen through NNLN, that's helped quite a bit to organize regional capacity building. We want to bring some regional capacity building events to different regions, and we want to talk a bit about that next week. And then also looking at funding at the local level. So these are all reasons we think our board moved forward with designing a map. And in the near term, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'll just stop right there and see if Pete or our organizational development chair, Christopher Coburn, want to say anything.
Yeah, I think, more than anything, Jackson, I think the strength of this is just making sure there's nobody that knows better what's going on in their own community than the CDFI and the boots on the ground in that area. And with having a strong voice in DC and the partnerships that we have, we just felt it would be a good way to make sure that there's no voice that's left unheard, whether it be capacity building or advocacy or possibly regional funding efforts and things of that sort. So we're going to be reaching out to all native CDFIs, and we're looking for support in helping NCN organize these regions that we've got laid out there. And then also, it's kind of like a lava lamp. We're trying to develop this and make sure that we've got each region well representative. And I know even with Amber's group there today, Montana would be left out in that Northwest region, but we're just trying to get this thing to mold. So next week we're going to dive into it deeper. So maybe take a look at those maps this week and, really come with some good questions next week. And what we're trying to do, it's the membership that has the voice and how we do things. So I think, next week, let's dive into it further there.
Mm-hmm. And I think finally, especially with the strong groups like the NNLN, we want to align and really get behind what you all are doing as opposed to duplicate anything. So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah. And
hey, Jackson, if I could.
Go ahead, Christopher.
Okay, I just wanted to add, so when you saw that breakout of how many NCN members were in each region, that's how many are active and dues paying. Like for instance, Southern Plains, there's 9 potential CDFIs, but only 3 members. At the very end of this PowerPoint, Jackson lists all of them by region. So if any of you are members and feel value and people at the others, NCN's worlds apart of where it was a few years ago. And hopefully we've demonstrated that, and these calls demonstrate that there's power together. And so we really need to grow and grow our network and interconnect more and look at more deals. And so the idea of these regional pods or regional groups will just help grow our capacity to meet needs on the ground and relay information up for national advocacy, and then maybe working together region to region. Also, hopefully we'll get members on our committees from these regions, so you can kind of steer policies. So that's why we want to do this, but we need your help. So thank you.
And one other thing, Jackson, I just want to interject here is the reason for these regions is our policy committee is going to be made up of 1 representative from each region, and the region will pick their representative on the policy committee. So, and the same thing with the capacity building committee is each region will be have their own delegation and be able to push forward who they want representing them on the NCN board. So I think that's going to be huge. It's just going to be more involvement from everybody.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Amber, thank you for sharing with us about what you all are doing and really taking advantage of the opportunities you have there in the Northwest and uniting the CDFIs out there. So thank you, Amber. Dante had to drop off. Oh, thanks. Yeah, Dante had to drop off. Next Friday, we're going to have Elsie Meeks, which I think almost everybody on the call knows and looks up to. So we're looking forward to that. And I'll let Pete take it away.
Yep. Yeah, and just thank everybody. And I do think these are good meetings, and I want to thank Christopher and Jackson for putting these meetings together. And we'll just keep moving forward on a weekly basis. And I think every week there's a new topic, and the things are moving so fast. So I appreciate it, Jackson, and I appreciate the membership for logging in. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. See you next week.